Hello.
I am Lauren.
I am Ken.
And this is Paradise After Dark.
Dark.
Paradise After Dark is an independent podcast covering true crime,
Unsolved mysteries,
missing people,
urban legends, and some strange places.
Please check out our website, paradiseafterdark.com. On the website, you'll find links to all of our episodes, even the archived episodes, our mailing list, merch store, links to our social medias, and, of course, our Patreon.
We also have a virtual tip jar there at our website, so if you want to help out the show, you can swing by there, throw a couple coins into the tip jar, and we'll be happy to give you a shout-out on the show.
So as you heard, Ken just added strange places to our repertoire here.
Exactly. And Lauren, before we get into tonight's episode, I have a question for you.
What's that?
How many people do you feel like could possibly know a secret and keep it? So in other words, usually they say that the only way to keep a secret is keep it to yourself. 2 people knowing a secret is dangerous.
Right.
How many people is too many people to know a secret? We'll talk about that here in a minute.
I don't know. Okay. So, strange places, as I was saying. Skidmore, Missouri is a strange place indeed.
Indeed it is.
And that's what we're going to be talking about on this week's episode. Tucked away in the northwest corner of Missouri in Nottoway County, about 46 miles north of St. Joseph, Medium.com calls Skidmore one of the creepiest towns in the United States. Mike Moran of the Confessional podcast wrote that Skidmore, Missouri doesn't have a population of a small town. It has the population of a small shopping center.
And when she says small, we're talking small.
The population was 284 according to the 2010 census. The latest estimate is about 250 people.
So it's dropping?
Yes.
Odd.
Houses are cheap, but no one wants to move there.
Sounds like they're all packing up and getting out of there.
And along with people trickling away from this quiet community year after year, go the few businesses and schools one by one.
I don't even think, you can't possibly have a school with 250 residents.
Crime rates are technically low, but when violence does visit this area, it's exceptionally mysterious and disturbing. Mm-hmm. Now, it all began with the near legendary tale of Ken Rex McElroy, Skidmore's most notorious resident. In the 60s and 70s, Ken McElroy was Skidmore's boogeyman.
Well, I have a different name for this Ken Rex McElroy. He was born in 1934, and he was the 15th of 16 children born to a poor migrant tenant farming couple named Tony and Mabel. Now, the family had moved between Kansas and the Ozarks before settling outside of Skidmore, Missouri. And the family was poor and were not part of the successful farming community of Northwest Missouri, which several people in this area were. Now, Ken grew up resenting those he considered to be more successful. And the kids of the farmers who were doing well, they were at the school, and so Ken just decided he was going to bully them. And he was doing this by like the 4th and 5th grade. So he was very young and just started being this.
So he became a bully very early on in his life.
Very early on in his life, yeah. This wasn't something that transformed later on. Now, he would do such things as steal lunch money from his fellow students. He would shoplift from local stores. And there were no consequences for this kid.
So the bottom line here was that McElroy was a bully who kids and adults alike were actually afraid of. He dropped out of school at age 15 in the 8th grade and quickly established a local reputation as a cattle rustler, small-time thief, and a womanizer. McElroy fathered more than 10 children with different women. He met his last wife, Trina McLeod, when she was 12 years old and in the 8th grade. Now, he raped McLeod repeatedly. The 12-year-old's parents initially opposed the relationship, but after McElroy burned their house down and shot the family dog, they relented and agreed to let him marry her. Now, there's another side of the story that states McElroy stalked Trina and burned their house down and shot the family dog until she and her family agreed to let him marry her. So we don't know if she actually wanted to be with him or if he just wanted her and he basically scared them or bullied them into
Well, I'm going to lean more towards he kind of bullied them into it. Maybe she didn't want to because she, again, was 12.
Right. Okay. So based on Trina's story, McElroy was indicted in June of 1973 for arson, assault, and statutory rape. He was arrested, booked, arraigned, and released on $2,500 bail. Now, Trina, at this point, who had had his baby, were placed in foster care in Maryville, Missouri. McElroy sat outside the foster home for hours at a time, staring at it. He told the foster family that he would trade girl for girl to get his child back, since he knew where the foster family's biological daughter went to school and what bus she rode.
Can you imagine the fear?
Additional charges were filed against McElroy at this time. And to avoid the statutory rape charges, he actually married Trina.
Wait, that is how you get out of it? Does that actually work?
Well, apparently back in the 70s.
I hope that doesn't work anymore.
For more than 2 decades, McElroy was suspected of being involved in theft of grain, gasoline, alcohol, antiques, and livestock, but he avoided conviction when charges were brought against him 21 times, often because witnesses refused to testify because he allegedly intimidated them, frequently by following his targets or parking outside their homes and watching them. Truth be told, even the police feared him. He took women and girls he found attractive, as young as 12 years old, to add to his family. That included multiple wives at once and over a dozen children.
Oof.
This is like insane.
It is. I can't even fathom. I can't wrap my head around the possibility of this actually being able to occur.
Actually, he was beyond a bully, more of a self-imposed dictator who ran the town of Skidmore like his personal kingdom, literally raping and pillaging for 2 decades.
Well, if you think about this for a moment, you think about the small town, even the town we live in. If you go back into the 70s, it was sort of a good old boy system, but it usually meant that someone was in good standing in the community. They did some nefarious stuff, but they just had friends in high places, so to speak. This guy was in the low place, and everyone in high places hated him, but they feared him. And I think that to me just seems so odd, but that kind of brings us to our story this evening. So according to BuzzFeed's Unsolved, McElroy was said to have been seriously injured in an accident while working on a construction site when a heavy steel beam dropped on him. Now, this accident led to severe chronic pain and possibly some brain damage that plagued McElroy throughout his entire life, which some townspeople believe attributed to or exacerbated his violent behavior and erratic temper. Maybe. I'm leaning a little differently. Now, in 1976, he shot a neighbor. You heard that right. He shot a neighbor named Romaine Henry in the stomach. But before the case went to trial, McElroy burned down the judge's barn and stalked the jury members.
This is insane.
And he was found not guilty. I mean, that was typical, locals say. That was typical of what would happen with this guy, that he was so powerful and such a bully that this would happen. And somehow McElroy always outfoxed the criminal justice system.
Wow. Well, 4 years later, McElroy shot a 70-year-old grocer named Ernest Bowenkamp in the neck, resulting in a 1981 assault conviction. Now, he should have gone to prison. Instead, the court released him on bail pending appeal. A few days later, McElroy was spotted with a gun, an M1 Garand rifle with a bayonet attached, a direct violation of his bond, and witnesses signed an affidavit against him. The bond hearing was set for 2 weeks away on July 10th. This led to several townspeople deciding to see what they could legally do to prevent McElroy from harming anyone else. Nottoway County Sheriff Dan Estes suggested they form a neighborhood watch. But when the court date arrived, residents learned the hearing had been rescheduled. On the morning of July 10, 1981, townspeople met at the Legion Hall in the center of town with Sheriff Estes to discuss how to protect themselves. I mean, they're actually having meetings, town hall meetings on how to protect themselves from this one man.
One person.
During the meeting, McElroy arrived at the D&G Tavern with his wife, Trina. Now, as he sat drinking at the bar, word got back to the men at the Legion Hall that he was in town and at the bar. Sheriff Estes instructed the assembled group not to get into a direct confrontation with McElroy, but instead seriously consider forming a neighborhood watch program. Estes then drove out of town in his police cruiser. The citizens decided to go to the tavern in masses. The bar was soon completely filled. Ken Rex McElroy got up and walked out of the bar, left, started his truck, and lit a cigarette. And then someone shot him in the head.
In broad
daylight, with 45 witnesses, with his wife Trina at his side. After decades of terror, the bully was finally gone.
McElroy was actually shot at several times, but only hit twice. Once by a centerfire rifle and once by a .22 rimfire rifle. Now, according to Mental Floss, the shooting proceeded for a full 20 seconds. It doesn't seem like a long time.
But it is kind of a long time when there's bullets flying.
Yeah, 20 seconds of gunfire is a long time, during which time Trina was able to flee the truck for safety inside a bank while McElroy was being killed where he sat, which was inside the truck. Now, in all, there were 46 potential witnesses to the shooting, including his wife, Trina McElroy, who was in the truck with her husband when he was actually shot. Now, during the investigation into the death, every witness denied seeing anything, and most concurred that McElroy deserved it. Now, media outlets sensationalized the killing as vigilante justice. But to this day, every last citizen that was there has refused to speak, and no one has ever been arrested in the slaying. Now, the murder of Ken Rex McElroy spawned true crime books, a made-for-TV movie, and a most recent docuseries on the Sundance Channel called No One Saw a Thing. Think about that for a minute. 45 people, over 45 people witnessed this, but they all kept a secret.
And I actually watched that documentary, No One Saw a Thing. Yeah. And it was pretty interesting.
If you get a chance, watch it. It's very interesting. But after all this occurred, it was awfully quiet in Skidmore for almost 20 years.
Yeah, they had a quiet spell.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it started again with the brutal killing of Wendy Gillenwater in the year 2000. Wendy Gillenwater was born in Skidmore on January 19, 1975. At the age of 19, Wendy moved in with her boyfriend, Greg Drago. Greg was a violent and controlling man who was into heavy drugs. On October 16, 2000, Greg beat Wendy to death. Drago kicked Wendy so hard that he bruised the tops of his own feet. While some accounts state that Drago chained Wendy to his truck and dragged her through town, it is believed that Drago actually beat her to death with his bare hands. The beating began inside the house when, according to Drago, he snapped and then dragged her outside the house and continued to kick and punch her. A neighbor came outside to see what was causing so much noise. He found Drago standing there in the yard with a lifeless figure at his feet and immediately called 911.
Drago admitted that even as he punched, kicked, stomped, and pummeled Wendy, she never fought back. Drago also admitted that he forced dishwashing liquid down her throat before dragging her body outside into the yard. This was brutal.
Yes.
It's brutal. And during the beating, Wendy suffered 6 rib fractures on her right side and 8 on her left. One of her lungs was lacerated and collapsed. Her liver was lacerated, and she suffered extensive internal trauma and bleeding. Her body was so badly beaten that her own mother could only identify her by the ring she was wearing. That is horrendous. You know what? Let's just take a quick break here, Lauren. And
yeah. And we're back. So on April 11th, 2001, Wendy Gillenwater's cousin, a young boy named Branson Perry, vanished without a trace. Branson Kane Perry was born February 24th, 1981, and raised in Skidmore, Missouri. He was raised primarily by his father, Bob, and graduated from Nottoway Holt High School in 1999. After graduating, he worked odd jobs, including work as a roofer, and helped maintain a traveling petting zoo in the area. Perry suffered from tachycardia, a condition that made his heart race excessively. He was a black belt in Hapkido. Now, Hapkido is a hybrid Korean martial art. It is a form of self-defense that employs joint locks, grappling, throwing techniques, kicks, punches, and other striking attacks.
Well, 4 days before Branson vanished on April 7th, he told his father that a neighbor, Jason Bierman, had drugged him and taken advantage of him sexually. Now, according to Diane Fanning's book, Baby Be Mine, Bierman gave Branson a, quote, unidentified drug. I could never find out exactly what was taken.
No, that I couldn't either in my research.
So we'll just call it unidentified drug. Now, after this, Branson stripped nude and started to dance around in Bierman's house. Then he shaved his pubic hair and, quote, had sex with Bierman. Now, Bob had long suspected that Branson was gay and that he'd had sexual encounters with other men, but the idea that his son had been taken advantage of against his will left him extremely upset. However, it would seem that the sexual assault was never reported to police.
On April 11th of 2001, Branson had invited his friend, Jenna Crawford, over to help him clean up the house he shared with his father, Bob. Bob had been in the hospital and was due home soon, so Branson wanted the house nice and clean, looking nice for when his dad got home. At the same time, 2 other unnamed men were outside the residence working on Bob's car, which needed a new alternator. At about 3 p.m., Branson walked out of the house, telling Jenna that he was returning a pair of jumper cables to an exterior shed on the property. This was the last time he was ever seen.
And the following day, Branson's grandmother, Joanne Stennett, stopped by his home and found the house unlocked and deserted. Now, this she claimed was highly unusual, and over the next few days, she called the home and tried to get a hold of somebody there and got no answer. Now, Joanne called Branson's mother, Rebecca, and found that she hadn't spoken to Branson in the last few days either. Now, Bob was discharged from the hospital several days later than planned, and after his release, he and Rebecca filed a missing persons report on April 17th. So he's in the hospital. He has no idea what's going on. He gets home and he's like, yeah, that's okay. I have no idea what's going on. Let's get the police involved. Now, ground searches were organized immediately, and fields and farms were searched to no avail. Now, this is an odd thing here, Lauren. Strangely, the jumper cables that Branson had walked out of his home to put away, they were also missing, right? So police come in, they search, and they never found them, the jumper cables that he supposedly took out there. But then, mysteriously, they reappear where they were supposed to be 2 weeks later. Now, it's possible that the police overlooked it, but, I mean, they did a thorough search, and this was like a shed. This is not like a huge area.
Right.
So the only thing I can relate it to is kind of like Making of a Murderer when they found her keys in his, was the bedroom or something to that effect, or
right, yeah.
They found the keys later on. They kept missing them, and then suddenly they appeared. These are jumper cables, not a set of keys.
Right.
So this is just something that's very strange because they looked for them, they couldn't find them, and then suddenly they're there.
Well, right after Branson Perry's disappearance, some sources say that Jason Bierman was nowhere to be found for 2 whole weeks.
Now remember, this was the guy that supposedly sexually assaulted him.
I'd find that to be a little suspect if it's true, but I could find no sources that actually ever named Bierman as an official person of interest or suspect in Branson's disappearance.
Well, I gotta believe authorities looked into it.
Over the following 6 weeks, over 100 people were interviewed, and Jenna, who had been at the Perry's home the day of the disappearance, admitted to law enforcement that Branson had been recently experimenting with marijuana and amphetamines. A family member also informed police that Perry had a bottle of Valium in his possession on the day he disappeared. Law enforcement questioned drug acquaintances of Branson's, but all stated they had not seen him, and each passed a polygraph. Branson's father, Bob, insisted that his son took off to Kansas City and that he was probably hitchhiking, but he wasn't found in Kansas City either, and the case went cold.
But on April 10th of 2003, law enforcement officials arrested Jack Wayne Rogers. He was a 59-year-old Presbyterian minister and a Boy Scout leader. They arrested him on charges of first-degree assault and practicing medicine without a license after removing a man's genitals in a makeshift gender reassignment surgery at a hotel in Columbia. Yes, you heard that correctly. Now, what does this particular issue have to do with Branson Perry? Well, while investigating Rogers' personal belongings, detectives discovered child pornography on his computer as well as evidence of various posts made on message boards under the username Booger Butt and Oh Hail Satan and Extreme Body Mods, describing the graphic torture and assault of multiple men. Now, in the post, Rogers also discussed cannibalizing the genitals of men he had castrated. Among these posts was a first-hand account of Rogers picking up a blonde male hitchhiker, then raping, torturing, mutilating, murdering him, and burying his body in a remote area of the Ozarks. Now, despite this, Rogers denied ever seeing Perry or knowing him and asserted that the post made was fabricated and purely fantasy. Now, law enforcement, however, suspected that the man in question was in fact Branson Perry. Now, while performing a subsequent search of Rogers' property, a turtle claw necklace, now this is one that resembled one owned by Perry, this was actually discovered in one of his vehicles. And when Rogers was sentenced in 2004, Rebecca went and begged him to please tell her the whereabouts of her son's remains. But Rogers continued to deny any involvement. And Bob, his father, passed away in 2004.
So he passed away never knowing what happened to his son.
Exactly.
In June of 2009, law enforcement revealed that they were completing an excavation of a site in Quitman, Missouri, after receiving a, quote, credible tip that Perry's remains may have been located there. After digging a hole 23 feet deep that covered an area of about 20 feet by 40 feet during their 2 days on the site, they ceased their efforts in that area. They still don't know what that was about.
Well, they also said that there were other farmers in the area at the time that said that they had already searched their area. So there must have been something about this particular area that they felt confident in.
And unfortunately, in February of 2011, Branson's mother, Rebecca, died after a years-long battle with melanoma. So both of his parents went to their grave not knowing what happened. Her obituary said that she had been preceded in death by her son. I think she knew he wasn't alive, but she always wanted to continue to look for him either way. Monica Kazin, founder of the Q Center for Missing Persons, told the News Tribune, Rebecca was buried beside an empty plot for Branson that lists his date of death as April 11, 2001, the same day he disappeared.
Well, I think at some point you have to just come to the conclusion that if there's no sighting, no word, I think she knew that he passed away, but it's kind of like as a parent, you can just imagine that they're going to go all in until they determine exactly what happened.
Right.
So let's take another quick break here, Lauren, and then we'll get back with some more odd stuff about Skidmore, Missouri.
Okay, and we're back. And if you thought that the violence surrounding this town was finished here, you would be mistaken. And would you believe that our next story is about another grandchild of Joanne Stinnett? That's correct. Wendy Gillenwater, Branson Perry, and our next victim, Bobby Joe Stinnett, were all cousins. So on December 16th of 2004, 23-year-old Bobby Joe Stinnett was discovered by her mother, who told 911 operators that it looked like her daughter's stomach had exploded. Bobby Joe was deceased, and her 8-month-old fetus was missing from her body. Bobby Joe, like most of the rest of the family, was born and raised in Skidmore. She and her husband had a dog breeding business, Happy Haven Rat Terriers, that they ran out of their home. Bobby Joe met Lisa Marie Montgomery, then age 36 and living in Melbourne, Kansas, at a dog show event, and the two women kept in contact through an online rat terrier chat room called Ratter Chatter and eventually emailed each other. Now remember, this is 2004.
Yeah, that was pre-DMs.
So Montgomery claimed to be pregnant at the same time as Bobby Joe. So the two women exchanged emails about dogs and bonded over, their pregnancies. They seemed to form a really nice online friendship.
But using a fake name, Darlene Fisher, Montgomery, who had falsely told others, including her husband, that she was pregnant. Now, she expressed interest in buying a rat terrier from Bobby Joe. And they actually set up a date to meet, which was December 16th of 2004. But to Bobby Joe's stinted surprise, Montgomery showed up, not the fictitious Darlene Fisher that she was familiar with. And Montgomery strangled Bobby Joe and used a knife to cut her abdomen open and extract the fetus. So took her baby right out of her belly.
Yep. This was big news when this happened. I remember when this happened.
And Montgomery then went on to claim that this was her own child. And Bobby Joe was discovered later on that day by her mother, Becky Harper, as she was lying in a pool of blood approximately an hour after this murder. Now, paramedics were unsuccessful in any attempts that they gave to revive Bobby Joe, and she was sadly pronounced dead at St. Francis Hospital in Maryville.
Nottoway County Sheriff Ben Espy was the first emergency responder on the scene and quickly mobilized the Northwest Missouri Mobile Case Squad. Staffed with investigators from several regional law enforcement agencies, Mr. Espy was notified that the child's umbilical cord was cut, prompting agencies including the FBI to join in the search for the child. In a frantic effort to make residents aware of the missing child, Mr. Espy struggled to get an Amber Alert placed for the baby. Because of criteria needed to place the alert, such as a physical description of the unseen baby, the Amber Alert was initially denied.
Could you imagine that? There's a child that's been brutally ripped unborn from a mother's belly, and you cannot get...
Because you don't have a physical description.
You can't get an Amber Alert.
But thanks to a joint effort and a phone call to U.S. Congressman Sam Graves, Sheriff Espy was able to enact an Amber Alert for the missing baby. Media broadcasts went up across the nation. Authorities from regional offices and the FBI determined no forceful entry was made into the home. Information on Bobby Joe's computer later verified that she had made arrangements to meet with a Darlene Fisher about the sale of a puppy on the day of her murder. When authorities couldn't locate anyone named Darlene Fisher, they began to believe the name was fake. A tip tied to the name Miss Fisher, additional witness information, and computer forensics led to Lisa Montgomery. Police had initially gone to Montgomery's home after tracing online communications to her IP address, hoping to interview her as a witness. But once they arrived, they saw the car they were looking for in the driveway, and when they walked in, Lisa Montgomery was sitting on the couch with a newborn baby watching TV. The kidnapped newborn, who she claimed as her own, was recovered and placed in the custody of the father.
Well, on the day of the murder, Montgomery allegedly called her husband, Kevin, called him on that same day around 5:15 p.m., saying that she was on a shopping trip to Topeka and that she had gone into labor and she had actually given birth. Now, Kevin claimed that he never for a second believed that this baby wasn't his. He thought this whole time that she was pregnant. She's saying, hey, I went into labor today, and he believes that this child that she possesses is his own child. And that was until the DNA results proved otherwise.
Well, Lisa Montgomery had been lying about even being pregnant, as she had done many times since she had her tubes tied 9 years earlier. Montgomery was charged with the federal offense of kidnapping resulting in a death. On October 22, 2007, jurors found Montgomery guilty, rejecting the defense claim that Montgomery was delusional. At a pretrial hearing, a neuropsychologist testified that head injuries in which Montgomery had sustained some years earlier could have damaged the part of her brain that controls aggression. During her trial in federal court, her defense attorneys, led by Frederick Duchard, asserted that she had pseudocyesis, a mental condition that causes a woman to falsely believe she is pregnant and exhibit outward signs of pregnancy. Dr. V.S. Ramachandran and M.D. William Logan gave expert testimony that Montgomery had pseudocyesis in addition to depression, borderline personality disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Ramachandran testified that Montgomery's stories about her actions fluctuated because of her delusional state and that she was unable to dictate the nature and quality of her acts.
Well, if you look into this, you're going to find a lot of information that was brought up in this trial regarding Lisa Montgomery and some of the trauma that she survived in her younger years, where she was raped, she was molested. She was basically trapped in a room and she was made to sleep with all these people. And you start hearing these stories of where she was just sexually assaulted and abused by her father. Her mother allowed it to happen. Her father would actually beat her. And they're saying that this head injury was her getting her head beat into concrete. But the one thing that I found in this and it kind of really made me angry, is none of this was ever brought to light throughout her entire life. Nothing was ever mentioned until she was facing the death penalty, and she basically had to go through appeals. And this was her defense, is she was trying to push it over on something else. It would seem to me that if all of that stuff and trauma occurred, there would have been something somewhere. Someone would have known something. But of course, this comes out during the trial. So, regardless of all the mental things and all the pseudocyesis, all this stuff with her that was brought up in trial, and regardless of all this, on October 26th, the jury recommended that Lisa Montgomery be put to death. And Judge Gary A. Finner agreed, and then he sentenced Montgomery to death.
Montgomery was executed by lethal injection on January 13, 2021, at the United States Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana.
Well, she became the first female federal prisoner executed in 67 years. Only 3 other women have been executed by the U.S. federal government. Mary Surratt, who took part in the conspiracy to murder Abraham Lincoln. Now, she was executed by hanging in 1865. Ethel Rosenberg, she was a spy for the Soviet Union, and she was executed by electric chair in 1953. And Bonnie Heady, who had participated in the kidnapping and murder of Bobby Greenlease, she was executed by gas chamber, also in 1953.
And you guys definitely want to tune in to our episode next week, where I spoke to a forensic psychologist who spent a lot of time with Lisa Montgomery and got a lot of insight about her. So it's pretty interesting. But back to what we're talking about now. Now, since the murder of Bobby Jo Stinnett and the kidnapping of her infant in 2004, there hasn't been any more big crimes in Skidmore.
That's because there's nobody there.
Maybe the curse or the bad juju that surrounded the town is gone, or maybe because it's just basically empty now.
Everybody gone.
In an article in Missouri Life magazine, Rose Hansen writes, "But Skidmore is more than its single narrative of tragedy. No one understands this better than its own residents. To locals, their hometown is a complicated place and far from bleak. In recent years, a few citizens have dedicated themselves to reviving the community and building a better future, a more hopeful future, one in which the goal isn't just to survive, but to thrive. It's peaceful here now. Nobody ever messes with you," says Jim Blessington, a tattooed, retired Marine who volunteers with Skidmore Community Betterment. With a chuckle, he adds, "Our reputation as a bad place keeps us safe."
All right, everyone. I think that's going to be it for tonight.
Again, if you'd like to support our show, please consider subscribing to our Patreon at patreon.com/Palmahawk Media. That's PALMAHAWK Media. On Patreon, you will get early and ad-free episodes and bonus content for Paradise After Dark and any other shows that Tomahawk Media may or may not be coming out with.
Ooh, I think that you just cracked it open.
I think I just dropped a hint.
Cracked it open. And also, be sure to check out our website for links to all of our social media where you can interact with us. I mean, we'll hit you up. If you leave messages, we go back and forth. It's a lot of fun on there. And we can get into some great discussions. Also, at our website, we have the merch store and the tip jar. We have a lot of stuff to go. So visit ParadiseAfterDark.com.
And please subscribe on whatever platform you're listening and rate and review. This really helps us branch out and reach a wider audience.
And as always, thank you, everyone, for listening
to Paradise After Dark.
Dark, 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 dark.